We are going to do the 4C notes now. Now, I might be able to do this whole thing in just one video. We're going to give it a try. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to translate each phrase into an equality, and we're going to be using x as our variable. As always, we have to follow the question's instructions. The computer will get mad if you use the wrong letter. So now, x is at least 5. So that since it's at least 5, it could equal to be 5, or it could be greater than 5. So if it says at least 5, that means it could be 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, or whatever. So this really, since it can be greater than or equal to, it is x is greater than or equal to 5. Now if it must exceed 4, that means it cannot equal 4. It must be just greater than 4. And that's why this is just x is greater than 4. There's a slight difference here. It must exceed 4, so it's got to be bigger. At least means it could be 5 or bigger. So this is greater than or equal to. The first one's greater than or equal to. The second one is just greater than. At most, -3. So that means it could be -3, but I want it to be at most, so it's got to be less than that. So this is going to be x is less than or equal to -3. You'll have quite a few different ones to do translations to, and you'll start seeing the patterns as you go. The absolute value of a real number is the distance from 0 on the real number. So if I set up a little number line here, here's 0, here's 3, and there's -3. So now, how far is +3? So if I do the absolute value of 3, that's 3 spaces away. If I do this again, the absolute value of -3 is also 3 spaces away. Absolute values are always positive because we're talking about distances. And so this is a review of Unit 3. We did this already, but we're going to do it again. Now we're going to solve equations once we start going further in the notes. All right. Next, we're going to translate to an inequality. All right, so it's less than 8. So now this time the less than, it looks very similar to those other translations, but this less than truly is a less than symbol. And what they do is, the questions are very nice. They will give you part of this. So all I have to do is translate 2 more than 6 times a number. Well, more than is addition. 6 times a number, that's 6 times n, and 2 plus that. So since it's addition, I could write 2 plus 6n, or I could write 6n plus 2. Remember, addition is commutative, and I can write it either way. This next question, this is just like El Cheapo car rental in the last section. If you remember that question from the prior notes, this will be pretty simple. Well, there's a $5 setup fee, so it's going to be $5 plus $3 per copy. Well, I don't know how many copies I'm going to make, so I'm just going to make 3C. And the most I can spend is $59, because I can spend no more than. So I could spend $59, so it's really less than or equal to. If I solve my equation here, I get 3C is less than or equal to 54. If I divide each side by 3, I get C must be less than or equal to 18. So the most copies I can make is 18 copies. So now, if I look at this first one here, it says at least 18. If I put in the 18 here, if I say at least 8, that means I make 18, 19, 20, 21. But that makes no sense. I can't make an infinite amount of copies, so that has to be wrong. It's 18 or fewer copies, because 18 is the maximum I can do. I will see 18 typed into this first part here all the time. Please be careful. All right, we got Joe the plumber here, and we're trying to find his average. He wants to maintain an average of 49 calls per week for a 3-week period. Now, we've been given the first 2 weeks. So this is 48 plus 53. Now, I don't know what the third week is, So I'm just going to make that x. So how do I find the average of three things? Well, I add them up, and then I divide by 3. So if we want at least 49 calls per week, so that means it could be 49, 50, 51. So it's got to be greater than or equal to 49. Now, I do not like fractions. Most people do not. How do I get rid of this? Well, what's the opposite of dividing by 3? I could multiply each side of the equation by 3. Again, what we're doing is, we talked about this before, multiplying by the least common denominator. When I do the 3's here, the 3's cancel, don't they? So that makes that very nicely. So 48 plus 53 is 101 plus x is greater than or equal to 147. Please use your calculator to verify that I'm doing this correct. I'm going to subtract 101. So x is greater than or equal to 46. So if Joe wants to average 49 calls per week, he's got to have at least 46 calls in that third week. To the next one here. Interval notation. We talked about that the last section. These are always kind of set up, and these could be brackets or parentheses, just depends on what the symbols are. But the lowest number always goes first, and the highest number always goes second. So when I'm looking at my graph over here, the lowest number is -3, the highest number is +2. And if you notice, they're both less than or equal to's, so really I'm going to use brackets on both numbers. The lowest number is -3, the highest number is 2, and they're brackets. Now, if I had a question something like 2 is less than, x is less than or equal to 6, this, remember, that's a parenthesis, so my lowest number will be 2, comma, my highest number is 6, that's less than or equal to, that is a bracket. It could be any combination of the parentheses and brackets. Less than or greater than are parentheses, less than or equal to greater than equal, they're always brackets. All right, now what I've done is I've really set up 2 questions here, so don't ignore, and I have 2 graphs here. Remember, it's always the lowest number first, then the highest number. So now, if I look at this graph here, this is x is less than or equal to -2. Here is my bracket, and it goes out infinitely this way. It goes out forever. So what is my lowest number on here? Well, if it goes out infinitely here, and this is the negative side, my lowest number is -infinity. Now, infinities always must have a parenthesis. You can never put a bracket on it, because you can never be equal to infinity, so that's why it's a parenthesis. The highest number on this is -2, so it's comma, -2, and since it's less than or equal to, that's a bracket. This next graph, I'll do it in a different color here. X is greater than 1. We have a parenthesis here, and it goes out infinitely this way. Again, we always do the lowest number first. The lowest number is 1. My highest number goes out to positive infinity, so there's a positive infinity. Now, again, infinities always require parentheses. So those are the 2 questions that I'm going to do in that. Absolute values. Now, if you remember, if I go back up here quickly here, whoops, a little further, absolute values are always positive because it's always a distance. -3 to 0 is 3 spaces, 0 to 3 is 3 spaces. So when I do my first question here, what value can I put in for x that will be +17? Well, if I just think the number line here, I'm going to have 0 here, 17 is 17 spaces away, and -17 is 17 spaces away. So really when I set up these equations, I'm just going to let x equals 17 or x equals -17. Now this time it is done. Those are my 2 answers, 17 and -17. Now they love throwing this question in here, but can the absolute value equal a negative number? No, it cannot. So this is really no solution. It's not -22, +22. Absolute values are negative, never negative. Now this next question. we have the absolute value of x minus 5 equals 24. So if inside here were positive 24 or negative 24, they would both work. So what I need to do is I need to set up an equation. X minus 5 equals positive 24, or x minus 5 equals negative 24. Then I solve each equation. So I add 5 to each side. I get x equals 29. I add 5 to each side here. I get x equals negative 19. So my answers for this question are 29 and negative 19. And it really doesn't matter what order you put them in, as long as you make sure you put both and put a comma in between the two. This next one is very similar. The absolute value is right here all by itself. So I'm going to let 3x minus 5 equal 28, or 3x minus 5 equals negative 28. And then I just do solve both equations here. I add 5 to each side. I get 3. Oh, what's happening with my pen here? 3x equals 33. Divide each side by 3. I get x equals 11 as one of my answers. I add 5 to each side here. At 3x equals negative 23. Divide each side by 3. I get x equals negative 23 over 3. So my two answers for this question are 11, negative 23 over 3. I know that second one looks a little funny, but there's nothing wrong with that. As always, if I can reduce the fraction, please do. If not, you're good to go. Now, our first kind of a little bit of a trick question in this. All of my other questions, the absolute value was always by itself. Now I have a plus 6 here. So I can't just make this positive 24, negative 24, because I'll have one correct and one wrong. What I need to do is I need to get the absolute value by itself first. So I'm going to subtract the 6 from each side. Then I'm going to have x minus 3 in absolute value is equal to 18. Now the absolute value is by itself. Now I can do the positive negative. So it's x minus 3 equals 18, or x minus 3 equals negative 18. Add 3 to each side, so I get one of my answers, 21. I add 3 here, and I get x equals negative 15. So those are my two answers, 21 and negative 15. But please remember, I have to get the absolute value by itself. If there's anything outside the absolute value on the same side of it, I have to move that to the other side first. My next question is very similar. The absolute value is not by itself, so I have to first add 4 to each side. So it's the absolute value of 4x equals 68. Now the absolute value is by itself, so I let 4x equals 68, or 4x equals negative 68. Divide each side by 4. I get x equals 17, or x equals negative 17. Okay. Alrighty. Now the last question. Everybody gets freaked out about this question, but it is not a bad question at all. First of all, it's nice in the fact that the absolute value is by itself. So what I have to do is, I just have to set them equal to positive 3/5 and negative 3/5. So my first equation is 2/7 plus 4x equals 3/5, or 2/7 plus 4x equals negative 3/5, just like all the other ones. Now people start panicking with the fractions, but you have a calculator. Let the calculator do the work. Minus 2/7 minus 2/7. So we get 4x equals 11/35. How do I solve for x? I'm dividing by 4, so I'm dividing that whole thing by 4, and I get x equals 11 over 140. Again, please let your calculator type this out here. Please make sure you understand how to do this. The next question here, do the same steps. I subtract 2/7 from each side. I get 4x equals negative 31 over 35. And again, I'm going to divide each side by 4. Negative 31 over 35 divided by 4, so x equals negative 31 over 140. I know those two answers are kind of crazy, but that's literally what you're going to type in. 11 over 140, comma, negative 31 over 140. Those are my two answers. It's just like all the other ones. They're a little weird, strange answers, but that's fine. All right, so that's the end of the 4C notes. There are no more questions to do, and that was actually pretty quick. It's about a 15-minute video for this section. Again, 4C is not too bad. And after this, when you get the homework done, then you're off to the practice test. Oh, pass the quiz as well.